My wife, caught in infidelity, asked if she could dance with another man at the gathering, and I harshly responded, "Dance with him and live single, for I no longer want you." The words slipped from my lips with an icy chill I hadn't known before. In a hall, echoing laughter and pulsating music, those words sliced through the air as if wielded by a sharp blade. There was a time when I unquestioningly trusted the woman by my side in what seemed an indestructible bond. But that evening, the facade crumbled, revealing a betrayal hidden in our shared past, yet casting a long shadow over the present. She approached me with a nearly innocent smile, asking for permission to dance with another man. A wave of coldness swept through me, and memories surged back. It was an apparently harmless request, but behind it lay a complex narrative, one she had never spoken about in our relationship. Before me, my past unraveled quietly, hinted by his furtive gaze and facial lines taut with tension. In that instant, an onslaught of feelings overwhelmed me: jealousy, fury, and betrayal. I was no longer the composed man she knew or the devoted spouse I had been. The bedrock of our relationship, trust, crumbled into countless fragments, with no hope of restoration. My eyes bore into hers, seeking a truth I didn't want to accept but sensed lay concealed behind forced smiles and unsaid words. She hesitated, yet had nothing more to say. The air around us seemed to hum with an almost tangible tension. For a moment, all attention focused on us, but it felt as if only the two of us were in that room. I recognized that dance was not merely dancing, it symbolized something she had concealed. And then I spoke the sentence that sealed our destiny. "Dance with him instead of me, you're no longer mine." The ensuing quietness was oppressive. She struggled to utter a word. I had no need for more words. I had already understood enough, or perhaps I understood more than I ought. The burden of those words was unbearable, but there was something I remained ignorant of, hidden beneath the betrayal's surface. A secret she concealed with meticulous care, and one that, in some way, linked that dance to her remote past. What was she concealing, and what did that dance truly signify? The details of this secret continue to elude me, but now the only task is to uncover the extent of the betrayal and what lies hidden behind a seemingly innocent dance invitation. She is yet unaware, but I am about to find out. The room was adorned with exquisite decorations, each element designed to suggest elegance and refinement. Lights from the chandeliers bathed crystals in soft gleam, harmonizing with the background music that set a festive, joyful ambience. The night was one many had been anticipating: an annual gathering for Denver's intimate, snug neighborhood of Cherry Creek, where locals came to dance, laugh, and momentarily escape their daily troubles. Among the noticeable pairs, Richard, a robust and self-assured man with captivating blue eyes, and his wife, Jessica, a delicately attractive woman whose smile held charisma, stood out. They appeared as an ideal couple, the kind often envisioned as inseparable for eternity. Richard had constructed his life on diligence and determination. He owned a small construction company and faced numerous obstacles, yet always found resilience in Jessica. She, reciprocally, possessed the ability to brighten any space she entered with her politeness and charm, making it hard to ignore her presence. In the eyes of their acquaintances, they were the epitome of a strong and thriving union. However, as is often the case, the facade might not always reflect reality. Over the past few months, Richard has observed a subtle alteration in Jessica. She appeared more detached, almost preoccupied. Previously effortless conversations now seemed labored, and instances of intimacy dwindled. Richard chose to dismiss his concerns, attributing it to fatigue or daily life pressures. Yet, an undercurrent of tension was palpable, something he couldn't overlook. The tranquility that once filled their nights was replaced by restless thoughts that caused him sleeplessness, leaving him questioning if everything truly was all right. In contrast, Jessica found herself caught in a maelstrom of conflicting feelings. She cherished Richard, or so she thought, but something within her had shifted. A section of her heart she believed had been forgotten long ago started pulsing vigorously once more. Lately, she has been reconnecting with old friends, stirring recollections of less complicated periods prior to marriage, prior to the duties that came with adulthood. Among these acquaintances, there was one who resurrected emotions she assumed were dormant: Michael, her initial love interest. Michael contrasted Richard in almost every aspect. Whereas Richard was steady and foreseeable, Michael was spontaneous and daring. The unexpected encounter with him at a neighborhood cafe after over a decade without contact reignited the attraction Jessica felt for him. He was no longer the reckless youth she once knew, but his eyes still held the allure that drew her. They conversed like long-lost friends, reminiscing over shared memories, and thus began the formation of an apparently harmless friendship. Richard remained oblivious to Jessica's new bond. In his mind, Jessica seemed engrossed in her personal affairs, possibly growing weary of their regular routine. He never fathomed that Jessica's past could be intruding upon her present, jeopardizing everything they had constructed together. He persisted in his work, confident that any obstacle they encountered would be surmountable, as they had always managed. That evening, as they readied for the dance, Jessica was unusually agitated. She spent more time than usual before the mirror, fiddling with her attire and makeup, appearing anxious. Richard, in response, praised her looks, stating she was beautiful as ever, but Jessica discerned the lack of enthusiasm in his tone. She realized there was a rift between them, something that might be beyond repair. They arrived at the event together, yet it seemed they were divided by an unseen wall. Richard interacted with his friends and associates, striving to preserve a semblance of normality, while Jessica appeared lost in her own musings. In the opposite corner of the room, Jessica observed Michael engaged in lively conversation with a cluster of individuals. Eye contact was established between them, a wordless interaction carrying profound significance. A shiver ran down Jessica's back, an uneasy blend of exhilaration and remorse that left her lightheaded. The music increased in volume, enticing couples to the dance floor. Richard observed Jessica's distress, but opted not to address it. He wished to avoid a commotion, particularly on this special occasion. All he desired was a tranquil evening, perhaps some amusement, a means of alleviating the tension within him. However, Jessica harbored different sentiments. As she watched Michael navigate the room, an ominous plan slowly crystallized in her mind. She knew it was wrong, that the potential consequences were dire, but the longing and reminiscence proved too potent to resist. Ultimately, Jessica turned towards Richard and inquired softly, "May I dance with him?" Taken aback, Richard looked at her without immediate comprehension. "Who do you mean?" he queried reflexively. Without speaking, she directed his gaze to Michael, who was covertly observing them from the other side of the room. It became clear to Richard instantly, and a wave of fury and deception nearly choked him. This was the dreaded night he had long anticipated, the night when all his doubts would be corroborated. He could have yelled, caused a scene, but instead opted for a frosty composure that proved even more hurtful. "Dance with him and remain single, because I no longer want you," he said coldly. The response left Jessica stunned. She hadn't anticipated this reaction, and for a short while she was incapacitated, unsure of her next move. The vibrant hall appeared to have become icy around them. All sounds vanished, leaving only the reverberation of Richard's words. That fateful night, their lives took an unexpected turn with a seemingly innocent request to dance. As events unfolded, they would alter their lives forever. When Richard spoke coldly, Jessica felt the floor give way beneath her. A chill in his voice she had never heard before left her shaken. His calm tone and measured words pierced her like a knife. In an instant, the beautiful ballroom with its twinkling lights and soft music transformed into a haunting nightmare where the gravity of her choices became unbearably heavy. Paralyzed, Jessica stood still, grappling with the reality of the situation, while Richard walked away towards the bar as if concluding a trivial business deal. Confused and unsure, Jessica didn't know how to respond. The urge propelling her to request dancing with Michael, stirred by senseless longing and the thrill of revisiting old times, quickly transformed into remorse. From a distance, she observed Richard at the bar, his stiff outline and the guilt chewed at her core. Yearning for something distinct, something fresh, everything now seemed to crumble apart. She acknowledged she couldn't rescind her words, and the burden of her choice began to strangle her. Michael, standing a few meters away, perceived the tension. He hesitated, but then approached Jessica, his expression grave. "Are you all right?" he inquired, genuinely worried. Ignorant of the exchange between her and Richard, he sensed something amiss. Jessica attempted to conceal her emotional turmoil with a forced smile. "I'm fine," she falsified, averting her gaze. However, they both realized it was mere pretense. The music persisted while couples danced blissfully unaware of the impending turmoil. Jessica struggled to concentrate on anything but the memories overwhelming her. The events of the previous months felt like they were all culminating in that instant. She yearned to revisit the past, yet doing so jeopardized what she cherished in the present. Observing Jessica's distress, Michael proposed a walk outside for some fresh air. She accepted, eagerly seeking an escape from the oppressive atmosphere within. The icy Colorado wind provided some solace within the venue. For several moments, they stood wordlessly, gazing at the night sky. Eventually, Michael broke the silence. "You seem troubled indoors," he inquired softly. Jessica sighed, recognizing her secret could no longer be concealed from him. "Richard disclosed something that altered everything," she confessed, still grappling with the implications of her husband's revelation. "I don't know what to do, Michael." Michael recognized a deeper narrative, yet respected Jessica's privacy. Yet, an inner force made him ponder about the possibility of rekindling their relationship, a second chance they might have. However, he was aware of the potential complexity and danger in pursuing such a path. Nevertheless, the idea of renewing something with her intrigued him. Jessica sensed Michael's gaze on her, causing her to question whether she truly controlled her life or if she was just succumbing to emotions. Meanwhile, within the lounge, Richard felt unusually somber despite his whiskey drinks. His thoughts revolved around Jessica and the man he now connected with the demise of his marriage. He didn't know Michael, but that detail held no significance. The straightforward action of Jessica requesting a dance with another man, coupled with her simultaneous expression of desire, shattered the last remnants of trust Richard harbored towards her. Surrounded by people celebrating, Richard felt detached and unresponsive. He contemplated departing from the gathering, fleeing from that location, but an unidentifiable force compelled him to remain. Perhaps it was curiosity about Jessica's future actions or stubbornness preventing him from leaving as a defeated man. Stepping outdoors, Jessica was on the verge of addressing Michael when she noticed commotion within the room. Various guests began exiting, some with concerned expressions. She and Michael shared a glance, sensing impending trouble. In an instant, the hall's door burst open violently, and Richard emerged, his face taut and eyes locked on Jessica. He halted before them, and for a moment it seemed as though time stood still. Michael hesitated, uncertain of what would transpire next. Richard stared intently into Jessica's eyes, disregarding Michael's proximity. "I trust your content," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm and hurt. Jessica couldn't utter a word. She understood that whatever she spoke now wouldn't alter the situation. The choice had been made, and the road ahead was fraught with ambiguity. Yet, something they didn't realize then was that the night still held secrets to unravel, secrets that would transform their lives irreversibly. With a final glance, Richard departed, leaving Jessica and Michael in the shadows. A heavy despair filled Jessica, as if the breath was being sucked out of her. She yearned to chase after Richard, to shout, to apologize, but her limbs remained immobile. Recognizing the gravity of the circumstance, Michael attempted to console her, but the events were beyond his command. All they could do was wait and see what lay ahead. In this tense silence, Jessica observed something chilling. A darker hue in Michael's gaze, absent earlier, filled with affection and nostalgia. She had never perceived this shadow before. It was a precursor to an unsettling truth she wasn't ready to confront. The night concealed unpalatable truths, none of which would be easy to swallow. The stillness of the Cherry Creek neighborhood enveloped Jessica as she lay immobile in the dark, the biting cold Colorado air seeming to chill not just her body, but her very soul. Richard's words lingered in her mind, resonating like an unchangeable judgment. He, her longtime companion, sharing joys and sorrows, was now a stranger, and Michael beside her seemed as if he mirrored the past, stirring up memories meant to stay buried. Michael spoke with urgency, his voice filled with an intensity Jessica couldn't ignore. He was now closer, his gaze intense, as if holding back something significant. Jessica hesitated, sensing the ground beneath her growing unstable. I knew the moment couldn't be delayed, but I feared what lay ahead. She followed him to a secluded corner, where the room's light barely reached them. Michael turned to her, his expression grave, almost desperate. "There's something you need to know," he began, and Jessica felt her heart race. "I'm not the same as before. I'm not that young man you met years ago, that boy who held dreams of happy endings." "Michael, what are you trying to tell me?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. Confusion and fear were building in her throat. "I never stopped thinking about you," he confessed, but the words should have been romantic. Instead, they carried a weighty burden. "For many years, I pondered about how our lives might have unfolded differently. When we met again, it seemed like a chance to rectify an old error, maybe salvage what once was. Yet, things aren't the same anymore. I've changed." "Jessica," Michael said softly, "we're no longer who we used to be. That was long ago, and we can't undo it." "We're different people now," she responded, her voice heavy with understanding. "But you mentioned us being different. There's more, isn't there?" Michael nodded gravely. "Yes, and there's something else I need to share with you." Jessica felt her stomach knot up. "What do you mean?" "I'm not the only one harboring secrets," he confessed in a low tone, his words thick with emotion. "And the secret I've concealed all these years involves you." The breath left Jessica's body, and for a moment, the world spun before her eyes. "Michael, what have you done?" Her voice was barely audible as shock washed over her. Michael stood silent, his gaze fixed on the ground, unable to meet Jessica's eyes. "I didn't tell you what happened after you married Richard. I didn't tell you how it shattered me, how I felt betrayed, not just by you, but by fate. I wish things had turned out differently, but I was young, reckless. I made mistakes, and one of those mistakes was maintaining contact with you, even when you were with him." Jessica began to piece together the puzzle, but still didn't fully comprehend. "But that was so long ago, Michael. Why does it still matter now?" "Because I never stopped desiring you," he conceded, finally looking up at her. "I never stopped thinking about us, and I allowed it to control me. When we met again, I saw an opportunity for a new start, but I knew that in order to achieve that, I needed Richard out of the picture." Michael's words struck like a punch. Jessica was left speechless, her emotions swirling in a whirlwind. Get Richard out of the way. "Did you tell him, Michael?" "I knew it would shatter his trust if I exposed our past, if I told him the truth about us. And then, at last, I could have been with you." "That was what I did," Michael admitted, guilt evident in your tone. "But I understood too late that things had changed. Time had altered everything, including ourselves." Tears streamed down Jessica's face. "Was it out of vengeance? Out of jealousy? Did you sabotage my marriage for something that happened long ago?" "I merely sought what I believed was rightfully mine," Michael murmured, his voice breaking. "You destroyed everything, Michael," she retorted, surprise transforming into anger. "You manipulated our encounters, orchestrated circumstances to make Richard doubt, all in an attempt to regain something that could no longer be restored." Michael said nothing, embarrassment evident on his face. Jessica knew he was truthful, but it didn't alleviate the pain of your disclosures. She experienced a sense of betrayal far beyond what she ever expected, as a cherished reunion with an old acquaintance morphed into an emotionally manipulative ordeal. Instead of fostering nostalgia, it turned out to be a meticulously contrived trap set by someone she believed was trustworthy. The truth, laid bare and brutal, left her shattered. Michael, whom she had idolized as a past love, exposed himself as a man fixated on an illusion that no longer existed. Their reunion wasn't serendipitous, but rather a calculated move to undermine what she and Richard had constructed. Jessica felt a boiling rage within her, spiraling out of control. "You toyed with our lives, Michael. You exploited our emotions as pawns in your twisted game, merely to gratify your own selfishness." Her words echoed through the air, laden with pain and disillusionment. Michael had no reply left. The harsh truth of his actions struck him squarely, and he knew that regardless of the outcome of this night, he had already lost. In her eyes, he finally saw the man he had become shattered, fueled by selfish and damaging impulses. His facade crumbled, leaving nothing but harsh reality. I erred, he whispered more to himself than to her, realizing his misguided belief that change was possible and they could restart. But alas, all his assumptions were incorrect. Jessica remained silent, the dismay evident on her face, carrying a weight that seemed unbearable. Yet she couldn't linger in regret, trapped by the past. He needed to act, make a choice that would shape the rest of his existence. The door to the lounge creaked open once more, and there stood Richard, gazing at the pair. He had returned not from cowardice or uncertainty, but to confront Jessica one final time. Facing the reality of their entanglement, the nightmare he had dreaded was now a chilling truth. However, to his surprise, he didn't discover a joyous couple's image. Instead, they exhibited pain, anger, and something ominous on their faces. "Richard," Jessica started, but he halted her with a silent gesture. He hadn't come for justifications, he sought answers. "I've had enough," Richard declared, his voice steady yet heavy with sorrow. "I ought to have recognized it earlier, but I was oblivious. Oblivious because I clung to the notion that you were still the woman I fell in love with." Jessica struggled to swallow, sensing her words carried a weight greater than any words Michael might have spoken. She wasn't the same anymore, and now she understood it. "Richard, but she was at a loss for words. "Is there something you wish to say, Jessica?" Richard inquired, his gaze piercing hers. "Can you be truthful now?" Jessica felt the burden of the moment, but she knew only one course of action, confronting the truth. "I was foolish, Richard. I allowed myself to be swept away by feelings that should have remained in the past. You shouldn't be with him. He doesn't belong in our life. Yet I let him in. I made a mistake, but I never meant to cause you pain." "That doesn't erase what transpired," Jessica's partner responded, maintaining his composure. "You left me doubting everything. Now I can't discern reality anymore." She understood that despite the turmoil, he was still wounded, but there was a quality about him that made her hopeful, perhaps, things could be mended. She moved closer, tears brimming in her eyes. "I know I caused you pain, and I know it might be too late to ask for forgiveness. But I still love you, Richard." He looked at her for a long while, then his countenance softened, but exhaustion and disillusionment remained evident. "Love shouldn't bring about this turmoil, Jessica. Love shouldn't devastate." At last, Michael spoke up. "I am the one who introduced chaos into your lives, not her. What I did was inexcusable, yet it doesn't erase her betrayal. Both have made mistakes, and I can't bear the burden anymore." Richard gazed at Michael, who seemed on the verge of an outburst, but instead sighed deeply. "Your actions were unforgivable, but that doesn't absolve her of her wrongdoing," he continued. Jessica felt her heart sink, recognizing the truth in his words. The wounds inflicted were too severe to be easily healed by simple words of apology. Yet she refused to give up hope. "Richard, please, let me rectify this," she pleaded. Richard remained quiet for a while, lost in thought, as if wrestling with an internal struggle. When he finally spoke again, his eyes bore the pain he felt. "I'm not sure I can trust you again," he admitted bitterly. The ensuing silence was dense and oppressive. The outcome remained uncertain, and everyone understood that the course they picked afterward would be arduous. However, one aspect was indisputable. A seemingly ordinary dance request transformed into a nightmare for all parties involved. Jessica anxiously awaited Richard's reaction as the gravity of her decisions weighed heavily upon her. All she could do now was wait for his judgment from the man she deceived but continued to cherish. As the biting Colorado wind blew by them, the approaching dawn seemed distant. The cold gusts mirrored the silence that settled between them. Richard, Jessica, and Michael found themselves in a painful standstill, each wrestling with their own inner struggles. The truth behind that fateful night still echoed, leaving a hollow space where certainties once stood. There was no turning back, and only the resolution of the consequences remained. Struggling with anger and despair, Richard finally spoke up, confessing, "I don't have a solution." For years, he believed their marriage was strong, that they were exceptional, but now he realized they were merely one of many drifting apart. Jessica felt the weight of his words, her heart filled with guilt and despair. She had always anticipated there would be repercussions for her actions, yet witnessing the destruction of the man she loved overwhelmed her. She acknowledged her mistakes. She recognized the past's harmful influence on their present relationship. However, confronted by Richard's pain, Jessica found herself in a dilemma she had never envisioned. "Richard," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, "I can't change the past, but what remains is deciding our future actions. Instead of allowing tonight to set the course for everything, we can opt to reconstruct something, albeit in a new form." This thought crossed Michael's mind as he observed the two individuals. He had been the catalyst that ignited the whole situation, but now he understood that the blaze he sparked was beyond his control. With this realization, he cautiously retreated, recognizing that his presence only served to complicate matters further. "I believe I should depart," he murmured softly, intending to exit the scene with whatever remnants of dignity remained. Richard glanced at Michael, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed as if he was on the verge of an outburst, but something within him shifted. He simply nodded, remaining silent. Michael turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving behind an ethereal specter of his past self. Jessica breathed a brief sigh of relief, yet she knew that the true test lay ahead. With Michael absent, she and Richard would now have to face the remnants of their marriage. "Can I ever truly forget?" Richard pondered, focusing solely on Jessica now. "Our shared dreams and convictions were shattered in one fateful night. How can we simply pick up and leave behind what was once ours?" Jessica understood there was no simple solution to this question. She saw the chasm deepening between them, a chasm born from years of unmentioned grievances, simmering resentments, and ultimately, the betrayal that exposed their hidden truths. "I'm not sure if we can," she confessed, bitterness lacing her words. "Perhaps we must decide whether it's worth trying or if we should acknowledge it's ended." The dilemma they faced was harsh. Jessica knew there would be a cost, but she wasn't sure if she was prepared to pay it. And Richard, grappling with the urge for retribution and his lingering love for her, couldn't decide whether he wanted to forgive or punish her. Richard abruptly inquired, "Do you still have feelings for me?" His tone implied desperation over a query. Jessica gazed intently into his eyes, hoping to find a trace of the man she knew, and responded honestly, though painfully so. "Yes, I do love you. Yet, I'm aware that might not be enough." Richard averted his gaze, battling imminent tears. "Love alone is insufficient," he whispered, almost talking to himself. "What we face now is a decision between trying anew or surrendering. But if you try, Richard, truly try, will you have my assurance that I won't make the same mistake again?" Jessica felt the gravity of the promise he requested. She knew pledging was one thing, but keeping that promise, given their past, would be a different matter altogether. Still, she saw no other path forward. "I give my word," she declared, with more resolve than she anticipated. "I acknowledge my failure towards you, and I understand this doesn't easily mend, but I'm prepared to make any necessary sacrifices to preserve what remains of us." Richard contemplated her statement, allowing the depth of her commitment to resonate. Their ensuing actions would shape their future, whether for better or worse. They teetered on a precipice, and the choice they made would propel them towards a fresh reality, regardless of their readiness. Thus, they stood there together, yet divided by an expanse that might never be completely bridged. The night was still long, and what followed next would determine not only their marriage, but also who they would become from now on. The choice loomed overhead, a bridge extending over the abyss separating Jessica and Richard. For days, they had evaded one another, as if visual interaction could expose the truths they both dreaded acknowledging. However, there was an accumulating tension in the quietness, a pressure that necessitated resolution. After the confrontation, the next morning found Richard taking action. The house was shrouded in an uneasy quiet as dawn broke. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, contemplating what remained of his life with Jessica. Memories of years spent together intertwined with recent distress, forming a tumultuous swirl of contrasting feelings. He yearned for clarity, something to light up the path before them, whether it led to reconciliation or farewell. When Jessica descended the stairs, her gaze met Richard's, filled with equal parts hope and apprehension. She didn't know what awaited her, but she knew she couldn't avoid addressing the unresolved issues any longer. "We need to discuss things," Richard said softly yet decisively. Jessica gave a slight nod, and they faced each other, the air heavy with tension. "I've been contemplating," Richard started, choosing his words wisely. "What transpired cannot be undone. The reality is we can't ignore the fact that everything has shifted. Instead of trying to resurrect what's shattered, perhaps we should ponder on our desires moving forward." Jessica grappled with these words, as the concept of final separation was still daunting despite acknowledging complete reconciliation was an unattainable dream. "I still harbor love for you, Richard. However, if this is insufficient, then it might be wiser to leave everything in the past." Richard gazed at her with a blend of sorrow and comprehension. "Love alone may not suffice, Jessica. Yet, we can decide whether to persevere or to part ways to discover something we're yet unaware we require." These words, though agonizing, brought a sense of clarity to them both. Their love had been genuine, but the wounds inflicted by their actions hindered a return to their former selves. They understood that sometimes the hardest choice is also the most essential. With a heavy heart, Jessica gazed at Richard, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It appears we have our answer," she said softly yet decisively. "Though I wish it wasn't so, perhaps parting is the wisest choice for us both." Richard gave a slow nod, his face reflecting sorrow. "I didn't wish for this outcome," he whispered. "Yet, maybe this is what we require to find tranquility." The ensuing quiet was heavy yet somehow freeing. They had reached the conclusion of their shared path, and though the anguish was palpable, there was also a tacit understanding that it was the opportune moment to bid farewell. There would be no arguments, recriminations, or fault-finding. Just the realization that, in spite of all we've been through, we both deserve a fresh start, even if it isn't with one another. The separation process over the following weeks was excruciating yet somehow tranquil. They sold the house, apportioned their belongings, and moved on with their lives. Jessica went back to Denver, intent on restarting her life free from the burden of her previous decisions. Concurrently, Richard chose to relocate to another city, searching for a location where he could discover a new purpose in existence. As for Michael, the individual who had disrupted the course of their lives, he vanished from both their spheres. Motivated by remorse and embarrassment about his actions, he departed without a hint, bearing the responsibility of his errors. He recognized that he couldn't rectify the harm he inflicted, but he believed time would provide him an opportunity to atone, away from those he had harmed. Several months later, on a bright afternoon, Jessica stumbled upon an envelope with her name on it, bearing no return address. Upon opening it, she found a letter from Michael. In the letter, he conveyed his remorse and acknowledged all his wrongdoings, hoping that she and Richard would find joy, even if they were apart. The message in the letter did not bring solace, but it served as the culmination of a painful episode. Jessica incinerated the letter, allowing the remnants of the past to drift away with the wind. As the fire annihilated Michael's messages, she acknowledged her readiness to depart from everything. Henceforth, they moved forward, both bearing their own wounds, yet also harboring the expectation that, despite a dismal past, the future may offer something beneficial. For occasionally, the conclusion of one tale initiates another.